Okay, so to your first question, I think from my perspective, the thing that has prevented us from coming together is lack of identity, lack of knowledge of self. And I'll give an example, right? For all the people out here who are married or have ever been married, maybe once or twice or however many times, to have a healthy marriage, you have to love yourself first. You have to know yourself and be strong in yourself first, and then you give of that to your spouse. And that's how you build a healthy marriage. So part of the damage that was done to us was as soon as we were brought here in chains, the first thing they did was strip us of our language and our names. And like my fifth generation great-grandfather, if he was brought when he was a boy, he didn't know a lot about his culture to begin with. If he was 8 or 9 years old, he had not gone through the initiation ceremonies that you go through at 18 and 26, where you learn more about your culture and all of those indigenous things. So within a generation or 2 generations, most of us lost that direct connection to our ancestors. And if you understand anything about who we are as African people and African spirituality, right, we understood that our ancestors live inside of us. The very blood and breath that we have is the blood and breath of our parents and our grandparents. And our grandparents and great-grandparents and so on built cultures and societies and ways of life based on this connection. That was severed from us. So, as a result, we've been lost. And as our elder brother over here mentioned, right, intentionally miseducated, and they use divide and conquer. What we are witnessing as a phenomenon within the Ancestry movement is that as soon as people understand to whom they belong, we are able to understand everybody else's story. Because what happened to me happened to you, and we're able to then go back and study history and find out the truth. And our ancestors say the truth will set you free. So let me give you an example. My brother Fode here comes from a people, right, called the Temna, and has relationships with other groups of people who were the ones that were trying to dominate my ancestors. And we got to talking about our ancestral identities and who we are. And you know what he said to me? He said, on behalf of my ancestors, I want to apologize to what they did to your ancestors. And because I knew exactly what he was talking about, that brought a healing in the ancestral realm and between us. So just because he comes from a different tribe, we both ended up here. We both ended up understanding, okay, these were the mistakes that we made. So learning the history of the mistakes that we made to each other is now the basis of a new Pan-Africanism where we're not going to make those mistakes again. I can get into more of this later if we want to, if we have time for the discussion, but I did want to address one other thing, which is the solution to this. The other part of what keeps us from coming together is we have lacked a framework, an organizational framework that encompasses all of our potential self-determination choices. This goes back to the moment of emancipation. At the moment of emancipation, when our ancestors were made free, at that point, as free human beings, we had the right to exercise self-determination, to make a choice. At that time, there were 4 logical choices. Either stay in America and integrate, return to your ancestral homeland, but you couldn't do that if you didn't know where you actually came from. If all you had was, I just came from this continent, that's not exactly the same as returning to actually where you came from. But it was either integrate into America, return to your ancestral homeland, build a nation of your own within the confines of America, or go to some third-party country. Those were the 4 choices available to us that at that time because we were miseducated and we didn't know international law, we did not understand the principle of jus soli. Meaning, when they came with the 14th Amendment and offered us citizenship, we never consciously made a free will choice to accept or reject that offer. Citizenship was imposed on us, and as a result, we never exercised self-determination. So, what should have happened at that point was a U.S.-sponsored plebiscite for self-determination for the newly emancipated slaves. At such a plebiscite, we would be asked, what do you want to do? And the obligation of the United States government is to provide for all four choices. So, for those people that want to integrate in America, they would get their resources to be made full citizens. For those that want to repatriate, they would get the resources to be able to return to their ancestral homelands. For those that wanted to form a new black nation in the area where we were predominant, which was this black belt territory, then all of the resources to provide for that had to be given. And for anyone that wanted to go to some other country, right, as long as they would agree and arrangements could be made, the resources had to be given for that. The reason why I'm going to this is because this is our point of unification. We spend our political energies in all these different directions. So the people that want to say, oh, I built America, I want to stay in America, their political energies go into that electoral political process. The black nationalists, their political energies go into their platform. Repatriationists, their political energies, they go, right? So the way to unify all of those is to have everyone demand for a U.S.-sponsored plebiscite for self-determination. That's the political organizing concept that can bring us together. And one last point, this is actually what was happening in 1964 when Malcolm X went to the Organization of African Unity. At that time in the African liberation struggle, there were 33 heads of state that had achieved liberation, and there were more that were in the process. We were considered a group that was in the process of achieving liberation. The instructions that Malcolm got at that time was he had to go back and set up one umbrella organization that would represent all of us, regardless if you were a follower of Martin Luther King and you were a Christian, whether you were a Muslim and you were part of the Nation of Islam, whatever your religious and political persuasion was, we needed a vehicle, an entity that could represent us internationally. And with that, then these governments could help us. That was the plan, and that's why Malcolm set up the Organization of Afro-American Unity, and that's why he called William Kunstler, right, who was an associate of Martin Luther King, and Kunstler called Martin Luther King and said, this is what we need to do. King agreed, and they were in the process of establishing that. And Malcolm's plan was to educate us on this at his third lecture at the Audubon Ballroom, and that's when they killed him. After that, COINTELPRO wiped out every other faction. Republic of New Africa, those were the nationalists and all the nationalist groups. They went for the integrationists, Martin Luther King and CORE and SNCC and SF, they went for them. And then in 1976, right, they came with National Security Memorandum 46, which was the government's plan to disrupt any effective black leadership. In 2001, when they had the World Conference Against Racism, and Cynthia McKinney was presenting these charges against the United States government, specifically with National Security Council Memorandum 46, that's when the United States walked out of the World Conference Against Racism. And as a result, till now, we have not picked up the banner of this concept of having one umbrella organization whose goal is to demand a U.S.-sponsored plebiscite for self-determination. That's the unifying principle.